Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost in this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost in this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, everybody? This is Joel Thomas, and this is Free the Rabbits. And how are all the free-range rabbits doing out there today? First off, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been lighting up the 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, leaving great comments, liking, sharing on YouTube. Thank you so much for doing so. If you've been following the show and you haven't done so yet, please, while it's on your mind and I'm talking to you right now, go give it a 5-star review. Go leave a comment where you can. It helps the show grow, and it helps it get deeper into the algorithm where people that don't normally get a hold of the show get a hold of the show. If you're new to the show, hey, wait until you listen to it, and if you feel like it's worthy of a 5-star review or a great comment, go and do it as soon as the show's over with. Also, YouTube memberships are up and running. This is not to give you any new content or keep anything behind a paywall. This is just for people that have been asking how they can donate to the show. It's one of 2 ways I have available right now to donate directly to the show. Just go to the membership section here on YouTube, and there are 3 different tiers with different perks for each, but generally it's just a way for people to be able to donate to the show and help the show grow. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com/freetherabbits, and you can donate by one payment there if you'd rather do that. Also, for everyone that has been asking for the past several months, Free the Rabbits intro song is up as a single. Just go to Spotify, just go to Apple Music, go to YouTube, type in Joel Thomas, Free the Rabbits, and you will find that song available to add to any of your playlists, so you can listen to that song as much as you want without having to rewind to the beginning of the episode as your only way of doing so. All right, guys, let's get into the episode. What's up, guys? I am glad to be back with you again this week, and I've got a special guest in the house, a really good friend of mine, and he is no stranger to the podcast game. However, he's not currently podcasting full-time. He's got another full-time job now, which is very interesting. And if you'd like to introduce yourself for everyone today, Justin.
Hey guys, I'm Justin Kiser, former host of the Appalachian Intelligence podcast. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard mine and Joel's team ups throughout the last 2 or 3 years. We've had a lot of great conversations. We dove into a lot of really cool topics. And yeah, he's right. I've taken a step away from the podcasting game for a little while. We are planning to do one final, grand finale episode whenever me and the boys, Lance and Ryan, get around to it and our schedules line up. But, it's just kind of been something that life's gotten busy. Other opportunities have presented themselves for each of us, but especially me. I'm now currently the pastor at a local Baptist church in my area. It's brought its own set of challenges, as I'm sure you could only imagine. But man, that's what God. I'm 100% sure that that's what God has called me to do and to be in this moment, and I'm putting everything that I can into it. I have a great congregation there. They're so open and loving and willing to serve the community and to be on mission, and man, just to show the love of Christ. And you can't ask for any more than that as a pastor, to have a congregation, a flock that's just so willing for that. So yeah, that's where I am right now. I'm still writing a little bit on the side, just doing little different things here and there. But I've been this has been official for a little over 2 months, so I've just jumped right in head first and trying to learn everything that I can as quickly as I can, as far as the business side of it, and just letting God lead, man, just hanging on to God's coattails and as hard as I can.
Yeah, man. I remember when you told me a few months back that you were considering doing this, because I know that the church that you said was asking you to do it. And, I think we had that conversation. Well, just, do what, God's telling you to do, which I think is important, because we all have different stations in life and what we're supposed to do. And sometimes those evolve into other things too. Because I think when you were with Appalachian Intelligence, I think it was important for that period of time that you were there. I think you built a lot of friendships with different people that you're still friends with today. And I think also it encouraged you to do a lot of research on not just conspiratorial topics, but deeper biblical exegesis of the weird and the strange and the paranormal. And I think it's very important, especially in this day and age, for us to, as Christians, look at what's going on in the weird world around us. Because, I don't care if you're pre-trib or you're little season, regardless, it's amping up. So we can
Yeah.
look at it either way and say that, things are coming down the pipe for sure. We can see them, we feel it, we know what's going on around us. I mean, you're just like me, man. We've been out in the woods, we've hunted things down, shot documentaries. We both know what all that takes. And I think it's really cool that you have now found a different calling in life, and I think that's important. But I did reach out to you anyway, because I was like, "Hey, man, let me drag you out of retirement for this episode," because one of the things that you have talked a lot about with your time with Appalachian Intelligence or on other podcasts was the idea that I am with you 100% in believing, but the idea that there are not just Yahweh, not just one Elohim, but there is a plural Elohim. There is a pantheon of gods or a divine council of gods that work in conjunction and sometimes not in conjunction with God. And I don't think that it's indicative of angelic beings either. I think this is a whole different class of spiritual beings that are operating in these other realms. And I say realms because I don't think it's just one realm. I think there's multiple realms. And the Bible's pretty specific about it. And I think that when we look at the scripture in the way that the Hebrews would have written it, I think that's where we can understand that they're not talking about men. They're not talking about some sort of wooden idols, which people now, especially modern Christians, always try to take the supernatural out of the Bible, which is fascinating to me because those same Christians will believe in a supreme being that created them, plus believe that Jesus Christ was risen from the dead, which
Yeah.
is two of the most bizarre things if you want to look at it just from a humanistic standpoint. You believe in those things. I'm like, why are you not taking on board the rest of this too? But I do think the idea of this Elohim plural which in the Hebrew, Elohim is used singular and plural in the Bible. I know some people push back on that and will try to say that when it's used in the Bible, it's only in the singular form. And they're taking it from the idea of the Ugaritic text when they talk about El, or the Akkadian text or the Babylonian text. We can go on down through there, but it's not. It's actually talking about two separate versions. And we will talk about that today when we look at the text, and we'll show you how that works. But I wanted to bring you on here to talk about that because, man, you've done some deep dives on these Elohim.
Yeah. Yeah, I have. And I agree with you 100%. One of our running themes on Appalachian Intelligence was, the old gods, what we called them all the time, that operated, that we think still today, here throughout the Appalachian Mountains and the Ohio River Valley. And, you can tie it into all these different things, the mounds and the mound builders and the giants and all of this stuff. It all wraps around together. So, as a Christian, with a biblical worldview, you start searching and you start looking and you say, okay, why is the gods mentioned in ancient Sumer depicted so similarly to the gods of the Canaanites, the gods of the Phoenicians, the gods of the Babylonians, the gods of the Egyptians, the gods of the Greeks, the gods of the Romans, the gods of the Celts, you just keep going on down the line. All of these civilizations throughout history, and though they have different names, and I don't believe that they're all the same, there are several of these Elohim, these spiritual beings. But I believe that some of them are, you look at this divine counsel worldview, and you're looking at this hierarchy. And this hierarchy, I think the same, just my personal opinion, I think you have the same 3, 4, 5 big dogs at the top that have just changed names all throughout history. They've depicted themselves in the same kind of fashion. They've always wanted the same things from the people. And then other than that, yeah, it's a lot of spiritual beings showing themselves off in a lot of different ways, ultimately to have us, humans, mankind, worship them. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I'm excited to dig into this.
Yeah. And I think one of the pioneers of putting this idea into the forefront was Michael Heiser.
Yeah.
He wrote The Unseen Realm. So he was one of the first people to make it very palatable to a mainstream audience of what we would consider normies, right? People that wouldn't even consider to look into the Hebrew when it comes to the way that the scripture is arranged. Now, I'm a big fan of the Berean Standard, and not just the Berean Standard, but the KJV. The way they word it, I just don't know how you can read it any other way, even in the KJV or any of these other texts, where that they try to say that these gods are Jewish leaders.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy. And I'm going to get into that today, why they think that and how that's not possible. But this is the hoops that modern day Christians jump through to try to take the supernatural out of a purely supernatural text. Why do you think, Justin, that modern Christians do that? Why do you think there's been a push to do that? One, to take the supernatural out of the Bible. And one, do you think it's a nefarious means? And two, do you think it's just humanistic viewpoints that have integrated within Christianity?
I wouldn't go as far to say that it's by nefarious means. I think that it has more to do with and I'm not trying to be mean, but we are a simple people who love to be comfortable. We love to be comfortable. We don't like to think about things that we can't really wrap our minds around. We don't like to think that this paranormal, this supernatural world exists. We think that if we can't see it with our own two eyes, and again, it goes back to the fact of you saying, we believe that Jesus Christ came from the thrones of heaven, that God incarnate took the form of man, walked this earth, that they hung him on a cross. And while that was going on, he took the sins of the world upon his shoulders, past, present, and future. And he took them to the grave, that they buried him in a borrowed tomb, and that 3 days later, victorious over death, hell, and the grave, he resurrected by the power of the Holy Spirit, resurrected himself, the triune God working in conjunction, and that he ascended back to the Father. We believe that. That is the basis. That is the gospel. That's the basis of our belief in Christianity. Yet, we can't believe that these other beings that God created, he sits and has meetings with them and gave them boundaries and nations to rule over and gave them jobs to do. We believe in angels, right? What does angel mean? It's not a name, it's a job title. An angel is a messenger, but we believe in that. It blows my mind. I think it comes down to more, again, like I said, we like to be comfortable. We like to be able to explain things in the simplest way possible, when this whole time, look, right now we're seeing an absolute flood of paganism again in the world. Atheism is not really a thing anymore. You've got your small sect, your small percentage, but nowadays, most conversations you have with people, they believe in something. There's too much weird going on. They believe in something. So, when you have these, especially pagan people who believe in all of these different gods, believe in this way of polytheism, man, it's a great way to start a conversation with a Divine Counsel worldview. When you can sit down and say, you know what? You're absolutely right. And let me explain it to you with the Bible.
I'm glad you brought up polytheism, because I think that's always a big deterrent for Christians when it comes to the idea of there being more than one God. And we'll discover through several Bible verses today where specifically it talks about Yahweh being the Most High. It never says that there aren't other gods. If anything, it's more indicative of he's the highest of the high.
Yeah. What's the first commandment? He ain't talking about, sports and cell phones and money. No, the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, says Yahweh, the Most High, a jealous God. Yeah, he is. But modern day preachers and evangelists and pastors, every time we hit this first commandment, what do we hear? Well, he's talking about, your time and your resources and your sports and don't make football on Sundays. Don't make the NFL your God. You need to be in church. No, man, we ain't talking about that. We are not talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think some of the issues that Christians have is that they look at the context of the Bible through the history of Christianity, not from the context of the biblical writers.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge flaw, because the context of the biblical writers back then viewed the world in a vastly different way than we do now. They saw these gods. It's not just that they knew they existed. They saw them. They interacted with them from the dawn of time. And I think that they would have known better than anyone when they were writing these texts how they wanted to convey it. The biggest misnomer about biblical text, and I would even say ancient text, man, I would even go back as far as Sumer and the King's List to show how people thought that when they were talking about these first 8 kings, that they were just blowing it out of proportion when they talked about how long these kings were reigning for.
Yeah.
When in actuality, they knew exactly what they were talking about when they put this list in. Why else would you make a list? It's just a chronology of kings. There's nothing else to it really outside of it starting with these kings come from above, right?
Yeah.
It's the same concept there as it is with the Bible or any of these ancient texts. Somehow our modern minds have, and I do think there is a nefarious piece to that, where there are people who have done their best to dissuade people from knowing what the real history of the world is. Somehow we think these people are stupid. They aren't as advanced as us. They were just using metaphors because they didn't know how to explain the normal stuff that we see today. It's fascinating how that we can look at something like the Great Pyramid and we can't replicate it. We've tried. That company out of Japan, what was it? Nippon tried
Yep.
to do it in the, correct me if I'm wrong, 1960s, I think it was, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't build it, and they were just doing a MIDI version of it.
Yeah.
So this is ancient tech, something you can't replicate. There's megaliths all around the world that were built in ancient times. So to act like these people are stupid is far from the truth. I think they were more in tune with the spiritual world for sure. But I also think that the spiritual world is just as active today, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
a lot of these entities have found a new way to interact. And I honestly think it's more on par with how they like to interact through technology. And I think that as opposed to in the past, it would be more of a show and tell. I'm going to show myself, and you get to see this, you know, beautiful or massive or, you know, scary God in front of you, and you're going to worship and bow before. I think that was a little bit more of what you would see in the past. And the more modernization now, they just morph with the times. Now it's, aliens and reptilians and these creatures that are, manipulating people through technology. So I think
Yeah.
it's changed, but it doesn't negate the fact that when they wrote these texts, again, Bible aside, I'm just talking about ancient texts in general, they knew what they were talking about. And this is why, Justin, that I'm so vehement about ancient texts like the Akkadians and Babylonians and Egyptians. They weren't wrong. These gods that they were talking about existed, Justin. It wasn't that they weren't interacting with them. I can't stand Christians that try to throw whatever these other religions are talking about as mythologies. Well, they could just as easily say that about Christianity.
Yeah.
The
Absolutely.
the real answer is there's truth to all of it. But the only religion, and I hate using the word religion, but I'm only using it in this context because it's easy for people to understand. But the only religion, Christianity, which, became Christianity after Christ, but the only religion that talks about one God being God above all gods that created everything, that interacts and supersedes for us, who has a relationship with us, is Christianity. Now, there are other religions that talk about a one creator God, but he's generally, like the Gnostics will talk about, just this monstrous being that we can never hope to even get close to.
Yeah.
The demiurges are about the closest we could get to their pantheon of gods, right? So that's the difference between this particular, and I like to say relationship. That's it in a nutshell. It's the relationship we're able to build with our creator. Whereas you look at all these other religions, man, you're not really talking to the creator. You don't have that relationship with him like that. It's different.
Yeah.
It's vastly different. I would say probably the only other religion that will come close would be probably Islam, and that's an Abrahamic religion. So
Right.
it's
Right.
very similar. It parallels Christianity in some ways, however, differs in the fact that it takes the divinity of Christ away. And I think that's the biggest flaw with that particular religion. He's just a great prophet, but he's not actually the Son of God or God himself. I think that's the main piece that's different. But yeah, I think that all of these religions, Justin, are very justified in what they put out. And yes, I do think these guys were manipulating them. We're telling them false things like, oh, I'm the creator God. Worship me. You know, look at me. I'm Horus. You know, look at me. I'm Baal. You know, that's what they were teaching their people. Obviously, it was a deception there, but it didn't mean that these guys didn't exist. It didn't mean that they weren't created by Yahweh and they were part of a divine council. Here's another one for you, Justin. It didn't say that every god on the Divine Council rolled out on Yahweh.
Exactly.
I would highly assume that there are gods that work for Yahweh even now.
Well, think about it. If you're sitting in a divine council, and I hate to even put it like this, but you're Yahweh, are you only going to surround yourself with people that have or beings, created beings that have rebelled against you and you've sentenced to judgment? I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, we know that Michael is talked about in several different Abrahamic religions as being the principality over Israel itself. So if we're looking again at this divine council worldview, that the nations were separated into boundaries to be governed by the sons of God, then yeah, he's probably going to surround himself with dudes that are on his side. That's what I would do. I mean, I'm not going to pull in a bunch and kind of going back to something that you said, just picking at a little of what you just said, talking about these ancient texts. It's the same thing that I say when I'm explaining the honesty of the Bible. Like if I am trying to start a religion, or as a lot of people will call Christianity or any other religion, a cult, if I'm trying to start this, why am I going to put so many super honest things? Like you can read the Bible and there are so many times that it's so reassuring and so encouraging and so uplifting when I'm reading about the failures and flaws of other humans like me. Whether you're talking about the apostles or you know, the guys, the prophets or the kings throughout the Old Testament, it's super honest. It's the same way with these ancient texts. Why extrapolate to a point that it becomes absolutely unbelievable unless you're just speaking the truth? You know, I could see if this was like, okay, guys, this is fan fiction or this is an ancient graphic novel here or what, but it's not. They're like they're documenting. This is how it is. You know, in the same ways, like I was reading the book of Luke last night and Jesus and the apostles, they're going into this town and, you know, the town doesn't accept Jesus or the apostles and James and John, sons of thunder, you know, they turn right around and they're like, hey, Jesus, you want us to call down fire from heaven and just wipe everybody out? And Jesus like, no, guys, that's not what we're doing. I mean, why say things like that? You know, why make these people, these heroes, look so human if it's not truth? In the same way, why do you say this king ruled for 28,000 years if it wasn't true? People, it's automatically unbelievable. And again, really quickly, you talked about things changing when Christ came. I think that's the difference, man. I think that's the key to this whole thing. How did Yahweh work throughout the Old Testament among the Israelites? With signs and wonders, right? Everything was about signs and wonders. I'm showing you my might. I'm showing you my power because I am your God and you are my people, right? That changed with Jesus. Jesus came, he gave him all the authority over everything in the heavens and everything on earth. And then it became about faith. I think that's kind of the same way that it happened with these old gods, these Elohim. They worked in signs and wonders, right? Because they can't create, they can just copy. So they worked in signs and wonders amongst the people that they had chosen and that they were portioned to govern over. But again, when Christ came, and they saw the real man in charge, the one who had full authority, the one who had the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions. Okay, it's like, all right, you are a rival mob gang, right? You're the mob boss. You got a bunch of little, lieutenants and enforcers, and you're busting heads all through the city. But the Godfather steps in, and he's like, we ain't doing this anymore. I'm in charge. I have the authority. And anytime that I want to call you out or cast you out or do whatever I want to do, I can do it. How do you start operating then? You start operating from the shadows. And that's where we're at. We have a bunch of dark spiritual entities. Some are these Elohim, these old gods, and they're operating from the shadows. They're using technology. They're using governments. They're using the media. They're using all of these different things. But again, they're getting the same results. They're getting the same results that they've gotten all throughout history. It's the same results, just a little different game plan.
You were talking about these gods being able to do these signs and wonders, and it made me think about what I was reading in Exodus recently with Moses, and it struck me differently this time reading it than I had before, because the first plague was they turned the water to blood. Moses and Aaron turned the water to blood, but Pharaoh really didn't care, and the reason why is that the magicians in his court did the same thing.
Yeah.
And then the second plague was frogs. And again, the magicians in Pharaoh's court did the same thing. It wasn't until they amped up to the third plague and beyond where they couldn't perform these mystical, magical rituals anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of funny with the frog one because of one of the main gods that come out of Egypt is Kek. And I think it was very indicative of God showing how much more powerful he was than their gods. He specifically was targeting different gods through these plagues. I don't think people know that, but that's what he was doing. So again, first couple magicians are able to mimic, but after that, it just gets just destroyed at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it's Yahweh declaring war, not only against Pharaoh, the holder, of his people, but it's God declaring war against the little g gods of Egypt. I mean, that's just what it is. Each plague specifically targeted a different god of Egypt. And again, like you said, it's him showing his might and his power and his superiority, saying, like, yeah, look, you may be able to do a few of these things. You may be able to replicate and mimic some of this, but I'm going to keep upping the ante, and you can't touch it.
Right, absolutely. And I think it's a good segue into start to talk about some of the biblical text and then get into some of these gods specifically that are talked about in the Bible. And we can talk about what they mean when it comes to some of the different cultures that were in ancient times. But I think one of the really good verses to start out with, before we even get to the Psalm 82, is Job 38, 4-7. Where were you at my laying the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you possess understanding. Who determined its measurement? Yes, you do know. Or who stretched the measuring line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars were seen together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. When God laid the foundation of the earth, the sons of God were there shouting for joy. But who were the sons of God? Obviously, they're not humans, right?
Right.
Not humans. So what are they? Now, you will hear many theologians say that they're angelic beings. Now, I don't think that these verses here are negating angelic beings at all. I honestly think the morning stars are more indicative of angelic beings, whereas the sons of God here, Beni Elohim, are specifically talking about these other lowercase g gods. Because the Hebrew term for angels, which is messenger, is malachim.
Yep.
And you'll see that consistently throughout when they're talking about angelic beings. I'm not saying, the caveat is, I'm not saying that in every case when the sons of God are being used, that it's always indicative of these Elohim, these pantheon of gods, or this divine council of gods either. I think in some cases it is being used to talk about angelic beings. We know this from Genesis 6. And we know that they're angelic beings because we know, if we tie it in with the book of Enoch, we know that these watchers were part of this grouping of angels that were kicked out after a rebellion. Now, the interesting thing to me is when we talk about this rebellion from Lucifer, we don't really know in what context that these other gods play a part in. Did they gas him up to do it? You know, did he have some sort of power that even superseded them? He was very close to God. He was even considered the right hand. But from all indications, he was a cherubim, which would be in angelology, not even at the top. It would be second down below the seraphim.
Yeah.
So what was it about Hillel that he had that put him in this upper stratosphere with these Elohim?
Well, think about it. Think about it in a way. Here's how I like to think about it. Like, think about a modern day church service. Okay. You have your pastor, right? That's going to represent Yahweh here in this um, little illustration. But then directly below the pastor, you have your deacons, you have your elders, you have, the leaders of the church. This would be these other Elohim, right? But then your worship leader, man, if he's good, he's getting all the glory. He's getting the praise. He's going to be the one that, if he wants to turn people against the pastor and the elders and the deacons, that's going to be your guy. So if you look at Hillel, Lucifer, in that kind of context, like, yeah, in the hierarchical ranks of things, he wouldn't have been, right there. But if we look at it, and scripture tells us, the music was made as he walked, as he took a step. That's how he was created, was to be this beautifully made, flamboyant creature that made music as he walked. If we look at it in a way of, hey, look, this dude was the worship leader in heaven or on earth or wherever they were, whatever realm they were occupying at whatever time. Yeah. Maybe some of these other Elohim were like, hey, why don't you stand up and declare a little bit of authority? Why don't you do this? That's how I try to picture. And I know that may not be the best example or illustration, but when you think about it, like, that's your real tension in any church that's starting to become split and divided. It's not usually, your elders and your deacons and all. It's the pastor and the worship leader.
No, I don't think you're wrong at all, man. I think that's a really good way of putting it. I do muse a lot about Hillel's purpose, right?
Yeah.
Because he's essentially become the figurehead of the darkness, right? That's who we think about.
Yeah.
And yeah, we talk about these Elohim and them being a part of this divine council. And I guess in our limited minds, we would think about it in a sense of they would be more powerful than Hillel. But that might not necessarily be the case either, because if God elevated Hillel to the position he was in, who knows what comes along with that elevation at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
And maybe he felt like that as the worship leader, man, these other Elohim need to be bound down too. Like everybody does. Like I'm the man. He walked amongst the ebon stones, the fire stones,
Yeah.
man, which is insane to think about because we know of the ebon stones showing up throughout scripture. And he walked amongst them. He was in God's presence perpetually. And I do find his story fascinating to me in what started his journey into darkness. What was it exactly? I always speculate that he might have actually known the blueprint of us, and that's what keyed him off. And maybe some of these Elohim as well, after we were created.
Yeah.
Maybe they saw that they wanted what God had with us and they left their station. Very similar, it's talked about in the Bible where angelic beings left their station. Well, I think that's kind of the same thing with these other gods.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that 100%. I think that it was, again, if we're speaking in this divine counsel way, Yahweh is sharing. I mean, what good CEO doesn't share the plans of the corporation with the people that work for him, right? So, yeah, there might have been some anger and some jealousy and some look, these beings, they were created by God. If we're looking at these beings as like an elder sibling, which I believe that they probably are, then we have to look at it in a way of where they're operating in the same free will that we're operating under. They are operating with some of the same emotions that we as humans are operating with and under. So if you have been this right hand man, and look, I am not saying this by any means to, let's show compassion to Hillel here and let's, that's not what I'm doing right here. Again, he made a gigantic mistake that he's already suffering for, and he's going to suffer for much, much worse. But I'm just saying to try to get the audience to really kind of wrap their mind around and understand, if you are the right hand man of the Most High God, Yahweh, and then all of a sudden you figure out that these lowly creatures are going to be made from the dirt and they're going to take on the image of Yahweh to become his image bearers, to have dominion over all the earth, over all the creatures, over everything in this beautiful paradise of Eden, you might get a little upset.
Yeah, and we know biblically he was the first caretaker of Eden anyway.
Yeah.
So he would have been the first. So if he was removed from his station because of his rebellion, then the fact that we were put back in that station, that gave him a lot of motivation to help us fall.
Oh,
At
absolutely.
that point.
Absolutely.
And he was highly motivated to control us and still is. But I do want to get into some of these hardline scriptures so people can really wrap their minds around how this divine counsel works. And I pulled up Psalm 82, and we'll read the whole thing, not just the first verse. I know people go to the first verse, but I think the entire psalm is a great way to look at how this divine counsel works. As a matter of fact, I pulled it up in the Berean Standard, and they divide it up into sections, and the section's called God Presides in the Divine Assembly.
Mm,
So
there you
that's
go.
actually what it's called. Now, again, you're going to hear people say that these are Jewish leaders that have turned their back on God. Some people will say that these are angels, these are angelic beings. In some of these verses, do you know that some people say that it is the Trinity
hmm
that is being talked about? But that is absolutely impossible. It'd be heretical
It's heretical.
because
Yep.
it would be heretical because God can't doom himself to die.
Exactly.
So, and you'll understand this as I read it. So we'll start with verse 1. God presides in the divine assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partially to the wicked? This is him speaking to the gods. Defend the cause of the weak and fatherless, uphold the rights of the afflicted and oppressed, rescue the weak and needy, save them from the hand of the wicked. They do not know or understand, they wander in the darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I have said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. But like mortals, you will die, and like rulers, you will fall. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for all nations are your inheritance. So I think it's pretty clear, just even in the Berean Standard English translation, what's being talked about there. I don't think we have to think too much deeper than that, but there are plenty of Christians that are ready to say that, oh, those aren't other gods. That's not in the Bible, because that would infer that polytheism's a thing, which you will have theologians that will argue that the Bible itself is built on polytheism and that there are hidden texts within that praise Baal and several other gods, which I've talked about on one of the other episodes I've done, which I don't believe. I think that the Hebrew writers had a very humorous way of writing about these gods, especially when they knew they weren't as powerful as Yahweh. And they would use verbiage so the nations around them would know that God was more powerful. So they would use verbiage of these other gods and their particular powers and attribute them to the Most High to show how he's better at what they're trying to do than them.
Yeah, absolutely. They made a mockery of these other gods by using their own titles and verbiage and signs and wonders, like we talked about, to say that Yahweh was that much better. And you look at Psalm 82, and again, like you said, a lot of theologians and modern day Christians will look at that and totally try to do mental gymnastics to get around of how this means earthly rulers or judges or kings or whatever. But you've got two different problems here. Number one is most Christians have never even came across this part of scripture, because most Christians, and again, not trying to be mean, just stating the facts, most Christians don't pick up their Bibles and dive into it and read. Number one. Number two, if they do, and they start reaching out to these leaders of the church, again, that's where the mental gymnastics come along. But it makes zero sense to me as to why you're going to tell human rulers that they're going to die like mortals. Wait a minute. What? It doesn't make any sense. I'm already mortal. Why would God tell me that I'm going to die like a mortal if I'm already immortal? No, these are these Elohim, these little g gods that God's speaking to. He gave them a job to do. They didn't do a good job at it. They were corrupt. So this is judgment.
And I've got a couple of points to refute the human view. We've already refuted the Trinitarian view because God can't kill himself. So we know that that's not possible. He's not condemning himself. So that's out of the way when it comes to Psalm 82. Now, the other one is where Christians say that the sons of God are human beings, the Jews to be specific. Well, there's a couple flaws there. At no point in the Old Testament does the scripture teach that Jews or Jewish leaders were put in authority over other nations. Matter of fact, it's the opposite. They were to be separate from other nations. The covenant with Abraham said if Israel was wholly devoted to Yahweh, other nations would be blessed. Now, that's Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And also, humans are not by nature disembodied. And the word Elohim means a place of residence. Our home is the world of embodiment. Elohim by nature inhabit the spiritual world. So it's not talking about human beings. Also, we can point to Psalm 89, 5 through 7 as another example of how it's not possible. And so the heavens will praise your wonderful deed, O Yahweh, even your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the sky is equal to Yahweh?
Yeah.
It's unmistakable. You are not in the sky as human beings. This is not human beings on earth. And the sky is obviously a metaphor for Shamaim or heaven,
Yeah.
this other realm. It's not talking about human beings here.
No.
The sons of God are not human beings. Not to say that the sons of God aren't used for human beings, because we know clearly, especially in the New Testament, that it's talked about from Paul, Peter, that the sons of God are us. We are considered a part of the family of God because of what Yeshua has done. But especially in the Old Testament, it's not talking about that. It's talking about these Elohim. And when you look at Elohim in the Hebrew and in the context, depending on where it's at, you can denote if it's plural or not. And if it's plural, it is not talking about Yahweh. It is talking about multiple gods that interact with human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's about context. It's about the context. It's like the English language. We have like sheep, for instance. You can have one sheep, you can have multiple sheep, but it's all about the context. It's all about the way that it's used. And when you're reading this, that's how we got to look at it. And you have so many people that just want to say, "Oh, no. This is specifically one God, Yahweh. That's it. End of story." But it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, especially when you start really looking at the deeper context of it. And I'm going to go through a few more verses too as we start delving into some of the other gods that are actually talked about in Scripture. We can go to Judges 11:24. Do you not possess whatever your God Shamash grants you? So also we possess whatever the Lord our God has granted us. Well, Shamash is a Moabite, Canaanite deity worshipped by ancient Semitic speaking peoples who occupied the region in the Hebrew Bible as Moab. And Shamash was the supreme deity of the Canaanite state of Moab and the patron god of its population. It was their top god. So in Judges, it says, do you not possess whatever your God Shamash grants you? So this God is granting the people that worship him a multitude of things.
Yeah, and this is one of those Shamash. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Sorry for cutting you off. But
go ahead.
Shamash is one of those, and this is what I love when archaeology backs up Scripture. Shamash is one of these deities that there is rare archaeological evidence that calls out Shamash by name, the Moabite stone or Mesha Stele, discovered in 1868 at Dibon. It bears an inscription commemorating the circa 860 BCE endeavors of King Mesha to overthrow the Israelite dominion of Moab. So we have archaeological evidence. Just say again, this is a legit deity.
Absolutely. And he's not the only one that's talked about. I mean, we can keep going. Kings 11:33, for they have forsaken me to worship Ashteroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Shamash, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites. They have not walked in my ways, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my statutes and judgments as Solomon's father David did. So we've got Ashtoreth, which I have talked in length with Astarte
Mm-hmm.
or Ashtaroth's connection to these Nephilim, this goddess that the Nephilim themselves worshipped. And I know that it's thought that this Ashtaroth was a fallen angel, and that could be a possibility. I do want to throw out the possibility that some of these fallen entities themselves masquerade as gods too. So there's that aspect. And I have suggested in the past that I think that Astarte could be a fallen angel. The reason why is because of her connection to Ishtar and Isis, which I think they're all the same goddess, and the connection to the Nephilim, that from her that Nephilim came.
Yeah.
So if we want to connect it to the Watchers and say that it's a possibility that this particular god was a fallen angel, I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see 4 types of gods, right? In at least that we know about, because I don't know much about the unseen realm outside of what we can barely pick apart from the Bible and other texts. But I think you got about 4 different things. You got these Elohim, this divine counsel, these gods that are of the same makeup as Yahweh. I think they're in the same type of being. I think you've got these fallen angels that masquerade as gods, and they're the ones that are procreating with man to create the Nephilim. And I think the Nephilim also masqueraded as gods, these demigods, these titans that we've seen throughout history.
Yes.
I think they also were showcased as gods. And then I think you've got your last piece, these demonic entities, which would be the disembodied spirits of these evil Nephilim that are looking for host bodies, or looking for people to possess, or manifesting in ways that people worship them. I think you've got about 4 different kinds that we can pinpoint to. There could be more, man. I don't know a whole lot about all these different realms and what's in them, but I know that we can point to these 4 kinds, and I can say that depending on the situation, it could be any of these 4 that could be masquerading as a god. Now, I think typically in the Bible, when they're naming out certain gods, we're probably talking about Elohim. We're probably talking about these entities that are of the same makeup as Yahweh, right? He's the Most High. He created it all, but he created these Elohim to be of the same type of being as himself. So he probably wanted that. He didn't need it. He doesn't need us to do anything for him, but he creates because of his massive amount of glory and love that he has for things that he creates. But he also gives free will to every single thing that he creates, man.
Yeah.
Every single.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's extremely important that you pointed out those 4 different kinds that we know about. And it's important to, when we're looking at Yahweh and his heart, who he is, it's important to see that, okay, so he created these other Elohim, right? The same kind of makeup. So we could say in his image, and they rebelled. They went full tilt in rebellion, right? So he casts these guys out, gives them different jobs. We know that there was a form of judgment there. They left they had to leave their post. Okay, then you have these fallen angels, again, created in his image. They are with these other Elohim that rebel. I mean, and again, we don't know the full makeup of how these armies looked when the rebellion's happening, but we know because of how hard Yahweh goes against these, what you and I believe to be these other Elohim in the Old Testament, that they weren't on really good terms. So there's rebellion there. So the fallen angels, these Elohim, they both rebel, right? But then you get to the Nephilim, right? you have these beings that are not of God's creation. You have these Nephilim that are going against God's very law of creation, which means, yeah, they've got a piece of Yahweh in them, but he is not creating these things in his image. And I believe that to mean more of bearing his image, not saying they look like him, but these are image bearers. They are a representation. They are an ambassador of me and my kingdom. These Nephilim, that's not what they were about. They broke the laws of creation. So when it come to that point, that's when you have the flood, right? That's when we have to destroy what's being done here to get rid of it, to wash it away. And again, due to that, because of that, that's where the demons come in. That's where these demonic spirits of these dead Nephilim who are not of God's creation. So they have no place to go. They're wandering spirits. They have nowhere to go. So then again, what do? Well, they do the same things they did when they had a physical body. They just do it again from the shadows. They're looking for a host. They're trying to do these things, but they're causing people to think, I'm a god. Worship me. I can do all these things. I can bring you all of these things. So I think it's really important that you laid that out. But I also think it's important to show the point that Yahweh said, all right, enough's enough. This is it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only caveat being any of these Nephilim that wanted to repent, which I think.
Yeah. Go check out the good Nephilim episodes.
So, especially after the flood, right? So I think that there is precedent for that, which again, I think if we even take that on board, that's just showing another layer to Yahweh's mercy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just another layer to the heart of God.
Yeah, you're looking at creatures who don't have the imaging. And I'm glad you brought that up because we will talk about that here in a minute. This imaging idea of what that means to be made in the image of God. Because I know a lot of more modern guys from the pulpit or theologians will say what they think that means. But I think it's more indicative of the DNA of God, essentially, that we have. We're almost like a projection of him. And I think that's why that these Nephilim were initially created, was because they wanted to disrupt the bloodline, because Yeshua had to come from a perfect human bloodline, because that would have been the perfect imaging, right?
Yeah.
The perfect image of God. But you brought up the demonic entities, and they are talked about also. We can go to Deuteronomy 32:17. They sacrificed the demons, which in the Hebrew is shadim, not to God, to gods, Elohim, they had not known, to newly arrived gods, Elohim, which your fathers did not fear. So in Deuteronomy, they're sacrificing to demonic gods. They're sacrificing to Elohim. They're sacrificing to the new Elohim, probably some that just decided to turn and do their own thing. So these folks are going insane right now. But that verse talks about the demonic part of it. That's part of that four-pronged layer of gods that even now people worship. And there's another verse too, I thought that was very interesting. And this would be maybe in that fifth layer. So in 1 Samuel 28:13.
Oh, here we go.
Now, this is, if people don't know, this is when Saul is having a rough time. He knows David is about to take over. He's trying to stop it from happening. He decides he wants to get with a witch and have her divinate for him. So he sends his messengers out to find one. Now, the best part about it is he already has a law out to kill him.
Yeah.
So Saul's, he has in his laws that anyone who practices magic, occult magic, they are to die. But he knows that there's some still around, and he talks to his closest confidants and has them go out and search one out. So he goes. Now he's in a cloak, and she doesn't know who he is initially. Ends up finding out it's Saul and freaks out, thinking she's gonna die. And he's like, no, 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 no. Like, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to kill you, but I need answers. Right. So he tells her that he's not going to kill her. And she asks him, whom shall I bring up for you? He says, bring up Samuel, the prophet Samuel, who's died. Now, Samuel used to be a close friend to Saul and used to prophesize for him. But he's asking her to bring someone back from the dead. And when she does, in verse 13, do not be afraid, the king replied. What do you see? Because she's scared when she sees Samuel. She says, I see a God, an Elohim coming up out of the earth, the woman answered. So initially, an Elohim disguised as Samuel comes forth. But then God switches it up and literally sends the real Samuel back. Now, this is another one of those verses, chapters in the Bible that modern day Christians try to gloss over. They don't want to talk about, because what this indicates is that people can come back from the dead. They can. Ghosts are a real thing.
Well, there's no other way to argue it.
So, how many other times have we heard stories, Justin? Because you and I started a lot of our journeys through the truth of world, through the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
And we know of plenty, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of stories of people who were almost about to die or something about to happen, and a family member came and warned them, or someone came and warned them, and then it stopped. Are we going to act like that every single one of those instances is some demonic entity that's manifesting like a family member? I don't think in every case, Justin. I think that, yes, in some cases, for sure, when family members are trying to get you to do things that cause a negative impact on you. And if you're trying to actively conjure people from the dead, I think this is where you're going to run into that. I think that's where you're going to run into these Nephilim spirits that are manifesting in the form of a family member.
Yeah, I agree.
But
I think if it brings you fear or confusion or chaos, then it's probably demonic. If it brings clarity and joy and happiness and peace and tranquility and solace, then God probably allowed it.
I would go as far to say, Justin, that God sent them.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because think about it. How much more are you going to listen to something that looks like your family member or is your family member in apparition form, as opposed to an angelic being that might freak you?
Yeah. Yes.
Especially if they're like in full-on seraphim mode and they don't look like us.
Yeah.
Fear not. But I'm already about to pop a cliff.
No, I think you're right. Every instance in the Bible where these angels show up, it's I fell flat on my face and I thought I would die, and I hit the deck, and the first thing out of their mouth, fear not, fear not. Well, a little too late for that when you're showing up in your serpent form or your four-faced cherubim form with your wings and your UFOs flying around you.
Yeah, and I think that these verses that I showcased are a good way to suggest that you don't need to warrant the plural Elohim as producing a pantheon of interchangeable deities. I think that's where that idea of polytheism comes in, because these are gods fighting each other. You'll see this in countless religions and countless ancient historical texts in different cultures. You'll see this where these gods are fighting each other. Just look at the Greek pantheon of gods. They're all fighting, which, by the way, I think they existed as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe had their own pantheon within this structure that Yahweh had already created. I don't think they didn't exist. I don't think that Zeus didn't exist, or Loki, or any of them. I think they did.
I think Zeus was Baal.
I absolutely am with you there. And I think as times change, a lot of them took on variations of their own name.
Yeah. Yep.
For sure. And I think they may have even presented themselves differently to different cultures. I don't think they presented themselves the exact same way. They may have had some of the same characteristics, which obviously Baal, thunder god, throwing lightning makes sense when you're talking about Zeus, right? But I do agree with you there. But it also goes to that verse I just read, newly arrived God.
Yeah.
In Deuteronomy 32:17. So I think as time went, I think you had other gods.
Yeah.
They all got free will.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean they all made a decision at once. I think that's where we got to get out of that mindset too, where they all just made this decision at one time, kind of like the classic 1/3 of angelic beings. Well, what about angelic beings after that? Did any of them decide to leave too? Maybe.
Maybe.
We don't know how that works.
Maybe. Yeah.
I really don't. But if
I agree with you there. I think that, again, you can look at Zeus and Baal and the comparisons, but it could just as easily be these newly arrived gods, new on the scene, that says, hey, this worked for this guy over here in this culture for hundreds, 1,000 years. I'm just going to do the same things that he did and give myself this little makeover, look a little different, cater to the people. And I'm just going to use this again. It's just copy, mimic, rinse, repeat, So yeah, it could have just as easily, it may have been the same deal, but it could have just as easily been one of these other Elohim, these spiritual beings that took what these other Elohim were the best at to get people to follow them and love them and worship them and sacrifice to them. Take some tools out of their toolbox and put it in their own and say, this is what I'm using going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that another issue, if people consider this Elohim idea to take full effect in your mind, I think some people think that because the usage is used for Yahweh as well, that it somehow denotes what I was just saying is interchangeable deities, that they're all comparable. But there are plenty of verses that would suggest otherwise when it comes to Yahweh and his uniqueness. We can go to Exodus 15:11. Who is like you among the gods, the Elohim, Yahweh? What God, Elohim, is there in heaven or on earth who can do according to your works and according to your mighty deeds? Deuteronomy 3:24. O Yahweh, God of Israel, there is no God, small g, Elohim, like you in the heavens above or on the earth beneath. 1 Kings 8:23. For you, O Yahweh, are most high over all the earth. You are highly exalted above all gods. Elohim, small g, Psalm 97:9. So this is consistently throughout scripture talking about these other gods, Justin. They existed, but it is absolutely in your face that Yahweh is above all of them. And from that, we can denote that he also created them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You read just a few pieces of scripture there, but it's over and over and over again, all throughout the Bible, of Yahweh's superiority. And that's the thing, when we get into these conversations, and again, everything that we're speaking right now, we're trying to bring clarity to, not confuse what we're trying to say here. Just because we are claiming there are all these other Elohim, these little g gods, Yahweh created all. He created everything. There's none like him. There's no one like him. It's all throughout the Bible. They say it over and over and over. And in my own belief and mine, and I think I can speak for Joel here as well, we believe there's none like him. So just because there are others, there is no one, no other God, no name. Yahweh is the name above all names. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He is the creator of the universe, the Almighty. It's just he has a whole lot of beings that he's created in this unseen realm that are moving and shaking and operating, and they have since the dawn of time.
Absolutely. And I think another pushback from your modern Christian and how this could be possible is the verse where it says, "No gods beside me."
Mm-hmm.
And it is a lot of times mistranslated or misinterpreted as saying that God means that no other Elohim exists. But that's just not true, though, because there's so many other verses that will say that Yahweh is above all Elohim, or is the God of gods, Elohim. And in essence, these denial statements don't deny that other Elohim exists. It's rather they deny that any Elohim compares to Yahweh. Just what I was talking about, the incomparability. So you'll see that throughout scripture where it's always denoted that he is above all gods. Well, why is that consistently talked about, Justin? Why is it always said that he's above all other gods? We ain't talking about football.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. It wouldn't be stated over and over and over and over again if it wasn't true. There has to be. You have all throughout the Old Testament. You have all throughout the New Testament. If you're reading the Bible with this worldview, when Jesus is operating, when he's performing his ministry, you can look at where he goes and line it out like a general on an absolute mission to make as many statements and to show his superiority against these other gods, these other Elohim. Just take the Gadarene demoniac, just for example, really quickly. They jump on the ship. The religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're constantly denying Jesus. They're mocking him. They're claiming that, he's operating under the power of Beelzebub and all these different things. So Jesus says, all right, you know what? I'm done with y'all. Y'all don't want to listen. I'm going over here to the Gentiles in Gerasene, or however you want to. There's like 4 different names. We'll just say that. So Jesus says, I'm going over here. He gets on the water. He's going the opposite direction. He's going into Gentile territory. What's the first thing that happens? Major storm hits, right? Automatically, you have these other Elohim, or this other Elohim, pushing against what he's about to do. Jesus steps out of the boat. The demoniac, the Gadarene demoniac, meets him, greets him, and starts saying, Jesus, Son of the Most High God, have you come to torture us? What's your purpose? What are you here for? Is it time already? Ultimately, they know what's happening right off the bat. Jesus has made it very clear. But just that whole and again, if you don't know the story, Jesus, the demons, it's legion, because for we are many. They asked Jesus to cast them out into the pigs, into the swine. They cast them out into the pigs, where some parts of the gospel say there was over 2,000. They run straight off the cliff and into the sea, which, they would have thought was, in that culture, the abyss. So they're scared of Jesus sending them to the abyss. Not one time did he say, no, I ain't going to do that. He just let them talk and let them talk and let them talk and let them freak out. And then said, yeah, all right, I'll do that. I'll do what you asked for. And then they dove off the cliff into the abyss anyway. But you look at the culture, you look at the context, this was a Greco-Roman city that had a temple to Athena, that they sacrificed these pigs to Athena around what we believe to be this same time of year. So this is a multi-layered game plan that Jesus is doing right here. Not only did he heal this guy, did he cleanse him from all of these unclean demonic spirits. Not only did he rid the people of these demonic spirits and cast them into the abyss of what would have been the sea, but he also got rid of all of the sacrifice, all of the blood, all of the stuff that was going to be delivered by the people to this Elohim. He wages war everywhere he goes. He shows his supremacy. He shows his victory in every step that he takes. Now, the modern Christian, you would just read that and think, oh, that's a cool story. Jesus just cast out more demons. These people are mad and tell him to leave because he just cost them a bunch of income. Well, yeah, he did, but that's not what they were mad about. They knew their God was about to get real mad.
Yeah, man. It's a wild story when you look at it with the layers to it and the context of where they were at and the time period they were at. And I think that's always very important. And I think that it also lends to the writers of the text. I actually think that if we deny that the Elohim exists, it actually insults the biblical writers and the glory of God.
I agree.
How are we going to sit there and say these people didn't know what they were talking about when, like in Psalm 97:9, for you, O Lord, are most high over all the earth, you are exalted far above all gods. Again, back to it again of saying that he's above all gods. And they're not talking about you going to the casino.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like Heiser says, or said, rest in peace. It's like Heiser said all the time. When we're declaring God's superiority over all of these other gods, if they're just made up, if they're just wooden blocks, if they're statues, if they're idols, then we're saying that our God, Yahweh, is superior to this wall. What superiority is that showing? What glory is that showing? By us as Christians denying the fact that these Elohim, these other gods existed, we're saying that God is better than this block of wood. Well, obviously, he's better than this block of wood. But when you look at some of the feats and some of the things that the worshipers of Baal witnessed, seen, look, 400 prophets are not going to stand and dance around an altar for half a day, cutting themselves, crying out and singing for something that doesn't exist. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
So when we deny that, we're denying in my personal opinion, we're denying just how almighty Yahweh is.
We're also denying how intelligent the biblical writers were back then too.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to them talking about idols. And they used to make fun of them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because they were making fun of some idol made of wood or stone or clay. It was because of what people did with these idols that they created. Do you know there was a ritual called opening of the mouth
Yep.
that was used from the old kingdoms all the way, you were just talking about it, Roman period?
Yep.
We know that the Egyptian ceremony, they would ritually open the mouth and eyes of statues, mummies, and coffins to enable the spirits to breathe, see, eat, and drink. So these idols that were created were essentially, for lack of a better word, golem for these spirits to inhabit, these old gods to inhabit, to divinate to the people through them.
Yeah.
And I absolutely think that the old gods used to manifest just in full form. But this was one of the rituals that people for thousands of years used to invoke these gods when they wanted them there.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
needed to talk to them.
People are still doing it today. It not only does it go up into Roman times, people are still doing it today. And I'm not going to pick on anybody or name out, any individual specifically, but there are some extremely famous people operating in the paranormal world right now who are doing almost the exact same thing. And they're bringing people on board to take objects, to perform rituals, to conjure entities, to enter into these objects, for people to experience paranormal activities with these objects. That's no, man. This is the same thing that's went on for thousands and thousands of years. It's an opening of the mouth ceremony. It's the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times I think people don't know what they're playing with sometimes and they're doing these things. Now, some of them do. So let's be clear, in this paranormal space, I know some of these people are very calculated in what they're doing. They might be hiding their true intentions, but I think people that have eyes to see and ears to hear can see what they're doing. And they are performing these rituals on camera
Yeah.
for people to join in with them without even knowing as they're watching. So I do completely believe that there are these opening of the mouth ceremonies that are still going on. We're talking about in the open. Of course, they're going on behind the scenes, but I mean in the open.
Oh, live streaming for thousands of people to watch. And now on stage, going on tours around the country. It's look out.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So I wanted to end this. We were talking about likeness. We were talking about being in the likeness of Elohim, singular. Well, I think that's also plural. And I'm going to explain why I think that. So in Genesis 1:26 through 28, and God, Yahweh, said, "Let us make humankind in our image and according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of heaven, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every moving thing that moves upon the earth." Verse 27, so God, Yahweh, created humankind in his image. In the likeness of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and birds of heaven, over every animal that moves upon the earth." Now, you will hear many theologians say that when God's saying, "Let us make humankind in our image and according to our likeness," they're talking about the Trinity. But it's not really a great explanation for it. It's more of a conversation that a person would be having with a group of people. Say you and I were in a room with a bunch of people, and I said, "Hey, let's go do this. Let's go to Dave and Buster's." And you're all like, yeah, let's Let's go to Dave and Buster's. Or probably a better example would be to say, let's get some hot dogs. And you guys are all in agreement with me. Well, you'll notice in verse 27, it switches from God talking about making humankind in our image, according to our likeness, to so God created humankind in his image. So he's having a conversation with the Divine Counsel saying that I'm going to imprint humankind in our image, this particular being type that we are, these Elohim that we are. We're going to imprint humankind with that. They agree. He does it.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, sounds good. It would be like me saying hot dogs, but I go get them.
Right.
We all agreed in the room, but I'm the one that did the work.
We are all agreeing for food that you're going to go pay for.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is important for us to see today, at least the people that don't know of this particular idea, Justin, because I think that it lets us know how powerful that Yahweh is.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a comparable nature to other gods, it's not comparable.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. One more quick thing before we wrap this thing up. When we look at all of these physical descriptions of these old gods, what usually comes up? These animalistic type descriptions, right? It's usually a mix of human, animal, some kind of amalgamation of what we would look at and think, well, it sounds kind of like a hybrid. But, and again, this goes into some of those different kinds of gods. But I think when you can look at these and when you're listening to the physical descriptions, I think you can almost say, okay, well, that one's Elohim. This one's probably fallen angel. Now, why do I say that? Well, how are seraphim described, Joel? Serpentine.
Well, they have 6 wings.
6 wings.
Serpentine.
Serpentine. How are cherubim described? With 4 faces.
4 faces.
Right? Each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. The 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. And the 4 had the face of an eagle. So, human, lion, ox, and eagle. Okay. When you start looking at some of the physical descriptions of some of these, and let's just run through some of the old gods mentioned in the Old Testament. Adramelech, right? He was an Assyrian god, had the face of a mule and the plumage of a peacock. He's also depicted as having a lion's body with wings and the bearded head of a man. We talked about Ashteroth earlier. Well, when she took on that form of Atzar-Gaddis, she was a woman with the tail of a fish. Baal is basically a minotaur, right? He's a super powerfully built, muscular man with a head of a bull. Dagon, supreme god of the Philistines, a merman. He was half man, half fish, or sometimes a bearded man wearing a giant fish cloak with a mouth always opened up toward the heavens. Marduk in Babylon. He was just a dude, right? Just this big, powerful, bearded man. But he had a pet dragon, which I think is pretty cool, actually. Some Game of Thrones stuff there. Moloch, a calf or an ox, right? A man with the head of a bull with his arms outstretched. A lot of times, again, the opening of the mouth ceremony that we talked about, they would create these giant furnaces with the bull's head to do what? Like in the book of Jeremiah, it tells us, it passed the children through the flames. So, child sacrifice, which is terrible. Nisroch, a muscular man with a head and wings of an eagle. Now, this one is kind of debated because this is one that is possibly, some theologians think that this could be a scribal error for Nimrod, who also, when we start looking at some of these god kings, could have been in this same kind of realm. Inanna, we talked a little bit about her just in other names, but Inanna, when you go all the way back to the Sumerian, she was associated with the morning and evening stars, Venus, and she was known by Ishtar in the Akkadian, Astarte in the Canaanite, Salska in the Hittite, and Aphrodite in the Greek. But she was always depicted with lines. Sometimes she had wings. So again, it's one of those things where it don't sound crazy when you say, okay, we have these fallen entities, these fallen angels. And I just told you some of these are just humanish form. And you have some of these and again, take Inanna, for instance. Well, yeah, she could have been all of these other deities and all of these other regions and all of these other cultures. But we also know these things aren't Yahweh. They're not omniscient. They're not omnipresent. They can't be everywhere at once. So again, it goes to those newly arrived Elohim. Hey, Inanna looks like she's doing real good over there. So me, Salska, I'm going to take on this same kind of role. I'm going to be about the same things. It's working over there for her. Let's do it over here for me. So, and that's, again, Inanna herself in the Sumerian usually is not depicted as any form of animal hybrid. She just has lines around with her. When you get into some of these other ones, she's got wings. She can fly. So is Inanna an Elohim? But Salska is a fallen angel?
Yeah, I like that. I'm with you on this line of thinking. I've really changed so much the way I've thought about these entities that have ruled over mankind, at least parts of it, in the past couple years.
Yeah.
Because I think there's this Elohim factor. And there are at least 4 types that we know about, and they're manifesting different ways.
Yeah.
But I do think some of these ones that have these animal heads are one of 2 things. They probably are some sort of seraphim or cherubim that's manifesting one of those forms that they're more comfortable with, especially like the cherubim, because they've got the 4 heads and they may just morph into which one they think would be more conducive to the area that they're in, that would connect with the people that they need to connect with. But there's the other part. When we go down the Nephilim factor
Yep.
of these animal human hybrids, these demigods that have these characteristics as well. So you got that other factor that they would have been masquerading as gods too.
Yeah.
And they would have been in a very physical form all the time with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got so many different layers to it. But I think when you add the Elohim factor into it, man, that opens up a whole nother idea that's outside of just your fallen angel, Nephilim, demonic activity. You got this other grouping of supernatural beings that are of the same makeup as Yahweh. They're in that same being category.
Yeah. And again, and getting back to kind of what we started off with this whole thing, I don't think they're all bad. I don't think they're all out for rebellion, for blood when it comes to their relationship with Yahweh. Again, we know from Deuteronomy 32 that when God divided mankind, he set the borders of the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Again, Elohim, B'nai Elohim. So, again, what we started off with, coming full circle here, I don't believe that they're all bad. Even if they started being worshipped, even if they are documented somewhere in history, there could have been some of the, well, probably not some of the names that we talked about, but names that you'll kind of glance over and read about or see in some of these ancient texts, because we do read about these gods that were great to the people, that did bring, according to them, fertility to the people and to the land and all of this really good stuff. So it's just like, okay, it's just like when Paul is a prisoner of Rome and he is on his way to Rome and he gets shipwrecked and he ends up on this island of Malta. Well, the people there, they love Paul. Paul starts by the power of the Holy Spirit, he heals this family who is diseased. Paul's doing these great things in the moment that God has placed him in. Well, Paul's building a fire one night. It's wet, it's cold, it's nasty. Paul decides he's going to build a fire. He gets bit by a viper, right? Viper sticks to his hand. He shakes it off. Well, the people of Malta are like, well, this guy is definitely guilty. He's got to be. He's a prisoner. He gets shipwrecked, number one. Somehow he survives that. But when he thinks he's free and he's looking real good, he gets bit by a viper. He's going to die. So they're waiting around for him to swell up. He doesn't. They're waiting around for him to get sick. He doesn't. They're waiting around for him to die. He doesn't. So what do these people do? This guy is healing people. He gets bitten by a viper. He's totally fine. He's a god. This guy is a god. And what do? They start worshiping Paul in that moment, right? Now, are we going to sit here and say that Paul is a bad dude? Absolutely not. Paul is one of the greatest Christians that have ever lived. Paul has contributed as much or more to the furtherance of the kingdom of heaven than anybody besides Jesus in history. How is that any different? It's not.
I completely agree. Look, man, you're preaching the choir with me. So I don't think by any stretch that all these Elohim are evil. And I really like what you just said there, that these Elohim performing what they're supposed to perform, that they would have been by proxy worshiped by people who assumed they were supposed to.
Yeah.
And I assume that this was where God's judgment came to the Elohim, the ones that allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
And fell into that trap.
Exactly.
They weren't funneling the glory to him and directing it where it should have went. And I think that's where we'll see that judgment come to the Elohim. But yeah, man, I'm with you 100%. You know me, man. I'm always looking for the good in just about anything. And I do think that life's complex. And I think that if life's complex just with us humans, I think it could be just as complex when it comes to the spiritual world as well, man.
Yeah.
Look, man, I had a blast with you today. It's fun getting on a podcast with you. The last one we did was on the confessionals. We were in studio talking about Lilith. I encourage anybody to go check that out. We talk about our personal experiences with the actual Lilith entity. And then the overtime segment, we go just bonkers talking about all kinds of interesting stuff when it comes to Lilith and some of the lore. But if you guys get a chance, go check that out on the confessionals. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on here. I had a blast. I'm sure we'll be doing some stuff again. Also, didn't say this earlier, but there's a super secret private project that I've got you helping me with that's been in the works for about a year now. And it is evolving and it is turning into something spectacular. So I'm pretty excited about that too. But yeah, man, thank you so much again. And, God bless you on your ministry too. And see you later, man.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being on here. Thanks for the invite. Love you, brother.
I'm only getting by, and I don't know the whys. I'm searching for a high, it eludes me. I'm looking left to right, and every day the signs say undermine my side, only confuse me. But I hope this road I'm on is worth it. Everyone seems to end in a serpent. The fork from the mouth of the ancients is a more beneath the surface. And I'm feeling the fire. I'm just feeling sparseness, the land of the heartless. And what is this gonna cost us? Just another carcass on another